the morning silence on Cedar Avenue shattered like glass. Gunfire erupted from every direction. Officer Carmen Martinez's patrol car spun wildly before slamming into a brick wall, metal groaning against stone. Blood seeped from beneath her crumpled badge onto the fractured pavement. Then, through the chaos, a figure appeared. Trevor Hayes, a single father walking his German shepherd, watched Atlas freeze mid-step, ears pinned back in recognition of danger. Without hesitation, Trevor sprinted into the storm of bullets, his weathered hands moving with surgical precision as he extracted Martinez from the twisted wreckage. Later, when the entire police force gathered around the security monitor, they watched in stunned silence as this ordinary man displayed skills that defied explanation. "Sir, you just saved my life," Martinez whispered, her voice barely audible above the sirens. "Who are you?" But Trevor was already melting back into the shadows, carrying secrets that would soon turn everything they thought they knew upside down. 3 weeks earlier, Trevor Hayes woke to his alarm at 6:30 in his cramped apartment on Maple Street. Bills covered the kitchen table like fallen leaves, each envelope a reminder of debts that stretched his part-time security salary beyond its limits. Through thin walls, he heard Mrs. Chen starting her morning prayers next door. 8-year-old Hazel slept peacefully beneath her faded unicorn blanket, auburn hair splayed across a pillow that had seen better days. Atlas lay sprawled in the doorway, one amber eye tracking Trevor's movements while his scarred left ear twitched at familiar sounds. The massive German shepherd's presence filled most of the narrow hallway, but Trevor stepped carefully around him with practiced ease. Morning sunlight filtered through their small window as Hazel appeared in the doorway, hair defying gravity in all directions. She wore yesterday's t-shirt and mismatched socks, but her smile could have powered the entire building. Trevor's chest tightened as she climbed onto his lap, small arms wrapping around his neck with fierce determination. The scent of her strawberry shampoo mixed with lingering aromas of last night's peanut butter sandwiches. Atlas settled beside them, tail sweeping across linoleum while his bulk filled the remaining kitchen space. "Are we having pancakes today, Daddy?" Hazel asked, hope dancing in green eyes that perfectly matched her mother's. "Maybe tomorrow, sweetheart," Trevor murmured against her hair, breathing in innocence that anchored him to this civilian world. Generic cereal would suffice again, though Hazel accepted their circumstances with resilience that humbled him daily. Outside, a police cruiser rolled slowly past their building, causing Trevor's shoulders to tense involuntarily. His hands clenched beneath the table, while memories threatened to surface like debris from a shipwreck. Atlas noticed immediately, ears pricking forward as he studied his master's face with intensity. The dog had learned to recognize emotional weather patterns, sensing disturbances in Trevor's carefully maintained calm. When the cruiser disappeared, Trevor's breathing gradually returned to normal. "Daddy, why do you get scared when police cars come by?" Hazel asked with devastating directness that only children possessed. Her spoon paused halfway to her mouth, milk dripping back into the bowl while she waited for answers Trevor couldn't safely provide. The refrigerator hummed in sudden silence, while somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's television murmured morning news. Atlas's steady gaze remained fixed on Trevor, remembering other mornings when similar questions had hung unanswered between them. "Some things from the past," Trevor said finally, voice carefully neutral. They just stick with you, sweetheart." Hazel seemed to consider this explanation with 8-year-old wisdom, then resumed eating, as if his response had clarified everything she needed to understand. 8 o'clock brought their daily routine as Trevor clipped Atlas's leash and stepped into crisp morning air. The neighborhood hummed with familiar rhythms, children walking to school with backpacks bouncing, elderly residents tending gardens that defied urban environments. Mrs. Rodriguez waved from her third-floor balcony, where flowering plants created splashes of color against concrete and steel. Atlas trotted beside Trevor with military precision, his gait betraying training that extended far beyond typical obedience classes. Other dog owners had noticed how Atlas never pulled his leash, never barked unnecessarily, and always positioned himself between Trevor and potential threats. If neighbors wondered about scars along the dog's flanks or how his ears swiveled at unusual sounds, they kept their curiosity to themselves. Cedar Avenue stretched before them like a familiar path toward nowhere particular, part of a morning routine Trevor had maintained for 3 years. This neighborhood had welcomed them with easy acceptance of communities where people minded their own business while looking out for each other. Morning joggers nodded politely as they passed, earbuds blocking out the world while pursuing fitness goals. Atlas suddenly stopped, massive frame going rigid as nostrils flared and ears locked onto something beyond human perception. Trevor followed his gaze toward the intersection where a police cruiser sat idling at the traffic light. Officer Carmen Martinez was beginning another ordinary day, completely unaware that her morning was about to become anything but routine. Martinez had been working this beat for 6 months, long enough to recognize familiar faces, but not long enough to feel completely comfortable. 29 years old and daughter of immigrants who had sacrificed everything for her opportunities, she carried their expectations along with her badge. Her father's words echoed during quiet moments. "Serve with honor, mija. Make a difference." The weight of responsibility felt heavier some days, especially when she thought about her younger sister who had been saved by a soldier overseas. That story had inspired Carmen's pursuit of law enforcement, though she had never shared those details with colleagues. Morning sun reflected off her windshield as she turned onto Cedar Avenue, unaware of predatory eyes watching from shadows 3 blocks away. Marcus Chen adjusted his rifle scope from his position in an abandoned warehouse, checking sight lines and calculating environmental factors with professional precision. He bore no relation to kindly Mrs. Chen, who lived next door to Trevor, sharing only a common surname. Chen's real name had been buried beneath layers of false identities and criminal enterprise spanning 3 states. His employer had made expectations clear. Sometimes law enforcement needed brutal reminders about who really controlled these streets. The warehouse provided perfect elevation and sight lines to the intersection where Martinez stopped for coffee every morning at exactly 8:15. Chen's finger caressed the trigger while tracking her patrol car through crosshairs that had claimed dozens of targets across his professional career. "Target approaching," Chen whispered into his radio, voice barely audible above settling warehouse timbers. 2 additional gunmen had positioned themselves in vehicles at opposite ends of Cedar Avenue, ready to cut off escape routes and ensure no witnesses survived. This operation was designed to be clean and brutal, a professional execution that would remind every badge-wearing officer about their mortality. Chen had orchestrated similar operations across multiple jurisdictions, each carefully planned to avoid leaving evidence or survivors. He prided himself on clinical efficiency, viewing each target as nothing more than a necessary component in larger business transactions. Through his scope, Martinez appeared larger than life as she parked and stepped onto sidewalk, hand resting casually on her radio while approaching the coffee shop where death waited. Atlas's low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound Trevor had learned to trust with his life. The dog's head turned towards the warehouse district, amber eyes tracking something invisible to human senses while his entire body vibrated with tension. Trevor's own instincts, honed by years in environments where vigilance meant survival, began sounding alarms that made his skin crawl. The morning felt wrong, too quiet, too still, like the moment before lightning strikes when even birds sense danger. Other pedestrians continued their routines, oblivious to electrical tension charging the air around them. Trevor's gaze followed Atlas's line of sight toward rooftops and windows overlooking the intersection, muscle memory automatically cataloging potential sniper positions, while his civilian facade began to crack. Martinez stepped from her patrol car, boots clicking against pavement as she locked the vehicle, and approached Dimitri's coffee shop with casual confidence of routine. The elderly Greek owner waved from behind his counter, already preparing her usual order of black coffee with 1 sugar. She had grown fond of these brief morning conversations, moments of human connection that reminded her why she had chosen this profession despite inherent dangers. Dimitri always asked about her family while deflecting questions about his grandchildren in Chicago with practiced ease. The bell above the coffee shop door chimed softly as she reached for the handle, neither noticing the red laser dot that appeared briefly on the front window before disappearing. Chen's radio crackled with final confirmations from his team, while Martinez stood perfectly positioned in their kill zone. The first shot shattered morning silence like a thunderclap, Martinez's coffee cup exploding in her hand, while hot liquid splattered across sidewalk. She dove for cover behind her patrol car as glass from the coffee shop window showered around her like deadly rain. Dimitri scrambled toward the back of his store while customers screamed and scattered in every direction. Chen's first shot had been deliberately placed as a warning, designed to create panic before the killing blow that would send his employer's message to every officer in the city. Martinez's radio crackled to life as she called for backup, voice steady despite adrenaline coursing through her system. Training had prepared her for moments like this, but reality always proved more chaotic than simulations could anticipate. Trevor sprinted toward the intersection while Atlas matched his pace with fluid precision, both moving with purpose that transcended their civilian appearance. The dog's military training had never truly left him, and he responded to Trevor's urgency with focused intensity of a working animal who understood his mission. Pedestrians scattered like startled birds, while more shots rang out from multiple positions, bullets sparking off concrete and metal with random violence. Trevor's mind automatically calculated angles and distances, tactical awareness painting clear pictures of the ambush structure threatening Martinez's life. 3 shooters positioned for maximum coverage and minimal escape routes, textbook execution that would succeed unless someone intervened with matching expertise. "Atlas mark!" Trevor commanded, voice cutting through chaos with military authority the dog recognized instantly. The German shepherd immediately began moving towards the warehouse, powerful legs carrying him across broken concrete with silent efficiency that spoke to training in environments where noise meant death. Trevor had taught him to identify and neutralize armed threats, skills that had saved both their lives during deployments where cooperation meant survival. Meanwhile, Trevor himself moved like a ghost through urban landscape, using vehicles and building corners for cover while approaching Martinez's position. His hands found broken concrete, weighing it automatically before calculating trajectory and impact force with precision that belonged to another life entirely. Martinez caught sight of movement in her peripheral vision and nearly fired before recognizing the civilian approaching her position with impossible calm. "Stay back!" she shouted, but Trevor was already sliding across a parked car's hood, his body moving with liquid grace that defied his apparent civilian status. Bullets sparked off metal and concrete around them as Chen's team realized their ambush was being compromised by an unexpected variable. Trevor landed beside Martinez, breathing controlled despite his sprint through hostile fire while his eyes scanned for additional threats. "3 shooters," he said, voice calm and professional despite surrounding chaos. "Warehouse, sedan, and panel van. You need to move now." The patrol car's windshield exploded as Chen's rifle found its mark, showering them both with safety glass that glittered like diamonds in morning sunlight. Martinez felt strong hands grip her tactical vest as Trevor pulled her toward better cover behind a concrete planter, offering protection from multiple angles. His movement spoke of training that went far beyond civilian experience, and Martinez found herself following his lead without question. Atlas appeared at the warehouse entrance, dark form barely visible as he began his approach toward Chen's position with predatory focus. The gunman in the sedan stepped from his vehicle, assault rifle raised as he sought clear shots at the police officer who refused to die according to plan. Chen's rifle swung toward new threats as movement in the warehouse caught his attention through peripheral vision. Atlas emerged from the stairwell like shadow-given substance, 120 pounds of muscle and bone launching through air with devastating accuracy that spoke to warfare training most civilians never imagined. The rifle discharged harmlessly into ceiling timbers as Chen went down hard, his body hitting concrete floor with bone-jarring impact that knocked consciousness from his skull. Atlas's jaws clamped around the gunman's wrist, applying precisely controlled pressure that immobilized without killing, training that distinguished military working dogs from ordinary attack animals. Chen's screams echoed through the abandoned building as he realized his professional operation had been compromised by an enemy he never could have anticipated. Trevor closed distance to the sedan-positioned gunman with movements that belonged to Special Forces operatives rather than civilian bystanders. The assault rifle swung toward him, but Trevor was already inside its effective range, hands moving with practiced efficiency as he stripped the weapon away with techniques learned in places civilians never visited. The gunman hit pavement hard, breath exploding from his lungs as Trevor's knee found his solar plexus with precision suggesting extensive close-quarters combat training. The weapon clattered harmlessly across asphalt, while its former owner struggled to regain consciousness that might be hours in returning. Trevor's muscle memory had taken complete control now, his body moving through combat sequences drilled into him thousands of times during a previous life. The third gunman in the panel van realized his operation was falling apart and decided to cut losses rather than risk capture. Engine roaring, he reversed hard down Cedar Avenue while automatic weapons fire sprayed wildly from passenger windows in desperate attempt to eliminate witnesses. Trevor swept Martinez behind an overturned vendor cart as bullets sparked off metal and concrete around them with random violence that spoke to panic rather than professional precision. The van's tires squealed against asphalt as it careened around the corner, leaving behind only acrid smell of burnt rubber and echoing gunfire. Sirens wailed in the distance as backup units responded to Martinez's call, while the entire engagement concluded in less than 4 minutes of controlled chaos. Trevor helped Martinez to her feet, his hand steady despite adrenaline coursing through both their systems. Blood seeped from a cut on her forehead, where flying glass had found its mark, but her eyes remained alert and focused on the man who had appeared from nowhere to save her life. "You're not just some random civilian, are you?" she said, studying his face with intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that defied easy answers. Trevor's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or regret for secrets that could never be safely shared with anyone who wore a badge. Atlas trotted back from the warehouse, fur slightly ruffled, but otherwise unharmed, positioning himself between Trevor and Martinez with protective instincts that never fully relaxed. "That life," Trevor said quietly, gaze fixed on smoking wreckage of what had been a peaceful morning routine. "I left it behind for a reason I can't discuss." He reached down to scratch Atlas behind the ears, and Martinez noticed how the dog leaned into his touch with absolute trust that spoke to bonds forged in circumstances she couldn't imagine. Emergency vehicles began arriving from multiple directions, red and blue lights painting the scene in strobing color, while paramedics rushed toward them. Trevor stepped back as professionals took charge, his presence becoming less noticeable with each passing moment as he seemed to fade into background like smoke dissipating in wind. Martinez tried to keep track of him, but somehow he managed to blend into the crowd of responders until she could barely distinguish him from dozens of other people gathered to observe the aftermath. Detective Ray Harrison arrived 20 minutes later, weathered face grim as he surveyed the intersection that looked more like a war zone than a routine patrol stop. Martinez briefed him while paramedics cleaned and bandaged her wounds, describing the attack and the mysterious civilian who had intervened with military precision that undoubtedly saved her life. "Did you get his name?" Harrison asked, making notes in his ever-present notebook while studying the tactical efficiency of the response. "Trevor Hayes," Martinez replied without hesitation. "Lives on Maple Street with his daughter and that German shepherd. But, Detective, there's something else you need to understand. The way he moved, the way his dog responded. They're not ordinary civilians." Harrison's pen paused above his notepad as he studied her face, recognizing when officers were processing experiences that challenged their understanding of reality. Harrison's investigation began with routine background checks that yielded surprisingly little information about Trevor Hayes and his mysterious past. He had appeared in the system 3 years earlier when signing a lease for his current apartment, but before that his trail went cold in ways suggesting either clerical errors or deliberate obfuscation. Employment history was thin, credit barely established, social connections minimal, the kind of background belonging to someone starting over rather than living an ordinary life. Harrison had seen similar patterns before, usually involving federal witness protection or military personnel transitioning back to civilian life with records carefully sanitized for security reasons. He made notes to dig deeper, though he suspected that excavation might require tools and clearances he didn't possess as a local detective. 3 days after the attack that had shaken the entire department, Harrison knocked on the door of apartment 4C on Maple Street. The hallway smelled of cooking spices and industrial disinfectant, aromas belonging to buildings where people worked hard to make ends meet. A child's laughter echoed from somewhere nearby, innocent and carefree in ways that seemed almost foreign after the violence he had witnessed. Atlas's deep bark rumbled from behind the door before Trevor's voice called for him to settle with authority. The dog immediately obeyed. When the door opened, Harrison found himself face to face with a man whose eyes held depths that belonged in war zones rather than suburban apartment complexes. "Detective Harrison," Trevor said without surprise, stepping aside to allow entry into his small but meticulously clean home. "I've been expecting this visit." The apartment was modest, but organized with military precision, furniture suggesting function over form, and children's drawings providing bright splashes of color against otherwise Spartan walls. Atlas lay in the corner, watchful but not aggressive, amber eyes tracking Harrison's movements while his master gestured towards the kitchen table. "Coffee?" Trevor asked, and Harrison nodded while studying the man who had appeared from nowhere to prevent tragedy. Up close, Trevor appeared older than his 34 years, with lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and shoulders carrying burdens beyond their physical weight. "Your daughter's at school?" Harrison asked, accepting the coffee cup with hands that had learned to read people through decades of law enforcement experience. "Hazel's in 3rd grade. Trevor confirmed, settling into the chair across from him with movements that remained alert despite apparent relaxation. "She doesn't know about what happened on Cedar Avenue, and I'd prefer to keep it that way." Atlas padded over to rest his massive head on Trevor's thigh, and Harrison noticed how the man's hand automatically found the dog's ears in a gesture both protective and comforting. The bond between them spoke to shared experiences that ordinary pet owners would never understand. "I need to know who you are," Harrison said, gently but firmly. "Not just your name, but who you really are underneath." "What I witnessed doesn't happen by accident." Trevor remained quiet for several minutes, fingers working through Atlas's fur, while considering responses that might satisfy Harrison's curiosity, without compromising the security he had built for his daughter. Outside, neighborhood sounds continued their familiar rhythms, children playing, cars passing, life proceeding as if the world hadn't tilted during brief firefight. "Special operations," he said finally, voice carrying flat tones of someone reciting facts rather than sharing memories that still haunted his sleep. "8th Group, 3rd Battalion. Did 6 tours between Afghanistan and Iraq before I mustered out." His words were measured and deliberate, offering information without inviting follow-up questions about experiences belonging in classified files. "Atlas was my partner for the last 3 tours. Military working dog, specialized in explosive detection and threat assessment. When I left the service, they let me adopt him." "Why did you leave?" Harrison asked, though he suspected the answer would be painful for both to discuss. Trevor's hand stilled on Atlas's head, and something flickered across his features before being carefully suppressed with discipline learned in places where emotional control meant survival. "My wife Rebecca was killed in a car accident while I was deployed," he said, each word measured and deliberate, like someone walking through an emotional minefield. "Drunk driver ran a red light while she was coming home from her night shift at the hospital." He paused, gathering himself before continuing with a story that had shaped every decision since. Hazel was in the car but survived with minor injuries. The drunk driver was fleeing from a high-speed police pursuit, through a residential area that violated every protocol. The weight of that revelation hung between them like a physical presence that made breathing difficult. Harrison had seen enough family tragedies to recognize the particular pain that came from losing someone while being powerless to prevent it, especially when that loss resulted from systemic failures rather than random chance. "That's why you avoid police contact," he said, understanding beginning to crystallize like puzzle pieces forming a coherent picture. "Not because you're hiding from something, but because we represent the circumstances that cost you your wife and nearly cost your daughter." Trevor nodded slowly, jaw tightening with emotions that had been carefully bottled for years, while he focused on rebuilding life from ashes and raising a child who deserved better than fate had dealt their family. "I don't blame individual officers," Trevor said, voice gaining strength as he worked through explanations he had never offered anyone else. "But the badge reminds me of everything I lost, every choice I made that put duty before family until it was too late." His smile was bitter and complicated, carrying undertones of self-awareness suggesting long nights examining motivations and regrets that could never be fully resolved. "So why did you intervene?" Harrison pressed, leading forward with intensity suggesting professional rather than personal curiosity. "Why risk everything you've built to save Martinez when police contact is exactly what you're trying to avoid?" Trevor's expression softened slightly, revealing glimpses of the man he might have been under different circumstances. "Because she didn't deserve to die for someone else's choices," Trevor said simply, voice carrying conviction that surprised Harrison with its quiet intensity. "Because Hazel has already lost one parent to violence, and she doesn't need to lose another to heroics that serve no purpose beyond my own guilt." Atlas's tail thumped against the floor, as if approving of his master's reasoning. "And because sometimes doing the right thing is also the hardest thing to live with afterward. But that doesn't make it any less necessary." Outside, school buses were beginning their afternoon routes, and Trevor glanced toward the window with automatic awareness of a parent tracking time and responsibilities that took precedence over everything else. The gesture reminded Harrison that beneath military training and combat experience sat a father whose primary mission was raising his daughter safely. Harrison closed his notebook and leaned back in his chair, studying this man who had appeared from nowhere to prevent tragedy, and then tried to disappear again like some guardian angel. "The department wants to recognize your actions with official commendation," he said carefully, watching Trevor's face for reactions. "Chief's talking about a civilian award ceremony, maybe some media coverage." Trevor's expression darkened immediately, and Atlas's ears pricked forward as if sensing threat from an unexpected direction. "No ceremonies," Trevor said firmly, voice carrying finality that brooked no argument. "No recognition, no publicity, no media attention. Hazel and I have built a quiet life here, and I intend to keep it that way." His tone carried weight of someone who understood how quickly public attention could destroy carefully constructed anonymity. Before Harrison could continue his argument, the apartment door opened and Hazel burst in with boundless energy, belonging exclusively to 8-year-old children returning from school. Her backpack hit the floor with a thud while she launched herself toward Trevor, chattering about her day with rapid-fire intensity of someone storing up adventures for hours. Atlas immediately shifted into gentle mode, allowing the little girl to use him as a combination pillow and jungle gym, while she recounted adventures in mathematics and social studies. Harrison watched the transformation in Trevor's face as his daughter claimed his attention, seeing how hard edges softened and shadows lifted from his eyes like clouds parting after storms. This was what he was protecting. Not just a child, but the possibility of normal life in a world that had shown him too much darkness. "This is Detective Harrison," Trevor said when Hazel finally paused for breath, voice warm and natural in ways that police contact rarely allowed. "He's here about some work stuff that doesn't concern you, sweetheart." Hazel studied Harrison with frank curiosity of childhood, taking in his badge and gun with interest but no fear. "Are you friends with my dad?" she asked with direct simplicity that made adult complications seem unnecessarily complex. "I hope so," Harrison replied honestly, meaning it more than he had expected. "Your dad helped someone recently, and I wanted to thank him for doing the right thing when it mattered most." Hazel beamed with obvious pride, apparently unsurprised that her father would help people in need, since that seemed to align with her understanding of his character. 2 months later, Chief Patricia Williams held a private meeting with Harrison and Martinez in her office, overlooking the downtown district they had all sworn to protect. "I've been thinking about our mysterious Good Samaritan," she said, settling behind her desk with coffee that fueled her 16-hour days. "The federal task force wants to interview him about possible connections to the trafficking organization. They think he might have intelligence value from his military background." Harrison and Martinez exchanged glances, both understanding implications of federal attention that could destroy the anonymity Trevor valued above all recognition. "Chief," Harrison said carefully, "I think that would be a mistake. This man saved Martinez's life and asked for nothing in return. Dragging him into federal investigation would be poor gratitude. He has a young daughter who doesn't know about her father's military background or what happened that morning," Martinez added while studying Williams's face for signs of flexibility. "If federal agents start knocking on doors asking questions, it could destroy the peaceful life he's worked to build for both of them." Williams studied both officers, reading protective instinct in their expressions with understanding from 27 years in law enforcement. "You're asking me to obstruct a federal investigation," she said, though her tone suggested she might consider exactly that under right circumstances. "I'm asking you to protect someone who protected one of ours," Harrison replied with conviction that surprised him. "Sometimes the right thing isn't the legal thing, and this man earned our discretion through actions rather than procedures." Williams remained quiet for several minutes, weighing competing obligations against moral imperatives while studying city views that reminded her why she had chosen this profession. Outside her window, ordinary life continued its daily rhythms, while she considered choices that would affect lives she would never directly encounter. "The federal task force receives our cooperation on their broader investigation," she said finally, voice carrying authority that ended discussion. "But our mysterious civilian remains unidentified in all reports. Computer glitch deleted relevant surveillance footage, and witnesses were too traumatized to provide accurate descriptions." Harrison and Martinez smiled with relief, understanding their chief had chosen loyalty over protocol in a decision that honored service above bureaucracy. "Thank you, Chief," Martinez said with gratitude, extending beyond professional courtesy. "This is the right call for everyone involved." 6 months after the shooting, Trevor received an unexpected visitor when Hazel was at a birthday party. Through the peephole, he saw a middle-aged woman in civilian clothes holding an envelope suggesting official business despite her casual appearance. "Mr. Hayes?" she said when he opened the door with caution that had become second nature. "I'm Deputy Chief Williams. I know you prefer to avoid official contact, but I wanted to deliver this personally." Trevor accepted the envelope with curiosity, warring against ingrained suspicion, noting how Atlas remained alert, but relaxed in the woman's presence. Inside was a simple letter of commendation on plain paper, without official letterhead, along with a check for $5,000 that represented more money than he typically saw in 6 months. "Discretionary fund?" Williams explained when Trevor's expression revealed surprise at the substantial amount. "Sometimes the city finds ways to thank people who make a difference without creating public records or drawing unwanted attention." Trevor stared at the check with emotions he couldn't quite name, understanding that $5,000 would cover rent for months and maybe allow him to replace Hazel's outgrown clothes while fixing the leaking faucet that had been dripping for weeks. It represented security in ways that few people who hadn't lived paycheck to paycheck could truly understand. "I can't accept this," Trevor said, though his voice lacked conviction that might have made the statement believable. Williams smiled with understanding, suggesting she had anticipated his response while hoping he would reconsider for practical reasons. "Consider it a consulting fee." Williams continued with tone suggesting this was business proposition rather than charity. "The department has been discussing enhanced civilian training programs based on lessons learned from your intervention. We could use an advisor with your background and expertise." Trevor looked down at Atlas, who sat patiently beside him, then back at Williams with expression suggesting careful consideration of unexpected possibilities. "Part-time only," Trevor said finally, voice carrying conditions that would need to be met. "Flexible schedule that accommodates my daughter's needs, and nobody discusses my service record with anyone outside the immediate program." Williams nodded agreement, understanding that some arrangements required discretion rather than publicity to function effectively for all parties involved. The consulting arrangement proved beneficial for everyone over subsequent months. Trevor helped design training scenarios that prepared officers for coordinated attacks and civilian evacuation procedures that might save lives during similar incidents. His military experience provided insights that traditional police training often overlooked, particularly regarding threat assessment and tactical awareness in urban environments where danger could appear without warning. He worked 3 days per week, usually when Hazel was in school, allowing him to maintain their routine while contributing meaningfully to officer safety through knowledge transfer. Atlas accompanied him to training sessions, demonstrating scent detection and threat identification techniques that fascinated recruits who had never worked with military-grade animals. Neither Trevor nor the dog seemed entirely comfortable in police station environments, but they adapted with resilience that had carried them through previous transitions. Martinez often attended training sessions Trevor conducted, finding his practical approach refreshingly different from academy instruction that emphasized theory over street experience. He focused on survival rather than protocol, teaching officers how to read environmental cues and trust instincts when situations felt wrong in ways textbooks couldn't describe. "Your weapon is important," he would tell new recruits during practical exercises, "but your awareness is what keeps you alive long enough to use it effectively." He never spoke about his own combat experience directly, but his knowledge came from places that academic instruction couldn't reach. Martinez watched him work with impressed admiration, seeing how he translated hard-won wisdom into lessons that might save lives while maintaining professional distance that protected his privacy. Years later, When reporters asked Martinez about the mysterious civilian who had saved her life during the Cedar Avenue shooting, she would smile and deflect with practiced ease that protected secrets she considered sacred trusts. "Heroes come in all forms," she would say when pressed for details. "Sometimes they wear uniforms, and sometimes they walk among us disguised as ordinary people living ordinary lives that matter more than headlines." She never revealed Trevor's identity or location, understanding that true heroism sometimes required protection rather than publicity that could destroy what heroes had worked to build from ashes of their sacrifices. Some stories were too important to tell completely, and some heroes too valuable to expose to public attention that might destroy carefully constructed lives built on foundations of love and loss. In the end, Trevor Hayes remained exactly what he had always been. A good man doing his best to raise his daughter and contribute positively to a community that had welcomed them without asking unnecessary questions. The fact that he had once saved a police officer's life during a coordinated attack became simply another chapter in a story ultimately about love, loss, and quiet courage required to rebuild meaningful life after experiencing both in their most extreme forms. Hazel grew up knowing her father was someone special, though she measured his heroism in bedtime stories, homework help, and unconditional love that had carried her safely through childhood rather than public recognition that meant nothing to a little girl who simply wanted her daddy to come home every day.